So the point of warfare in the late 1700s was to break the enemy's line. Once his line was broken, you could send in your cavalry behind, chop them to ribbons, they'd be facing away from you, you shoot them in the back. So they'd do whatever they could think of to get the guy's lines to break, and one of the best things they thought of was shooting solid shot cannonballs into them. And it didn't explode when it impacted, but what it would do is bounce along through the ranks of the troops like a bowling ball from hell, taking off people's body parts, basically. This is kind of a graphic shot, but it's actually historically very accurate. The diaries of that period were just filled with stories of people looking over and, oops, oh my God, their buddy's head's gone off. Technically, it's a fairly straightforward piece of work. We started out with a plate with a few soldiers, a couple of explosions planted down on the ground to give the illusion of where the cannonball would be bouncing. We multiplied the soldiers about 1,000, 2,000 into the shot itself and added an animated cannonball making the bounce forward to us. The troops are extended by cutting and pasting from other takes so that they kind of go across the front edge. It's a fairly simple model, but getting the animation right is a little bit tricky, and it took us 2 or 3 tries, which, as you're seeing here, to find exactly the right timing for the thing bouncing forward. First shot was a little fast. We go for a second one where there's a little bit more time to see the cannonball actually coming toward you and hitting. So when the cannonball would come in, it would basically take off whatever it hit. Obviously, we didn't take a person's head off. We've got a stuntman here who is miming as best he can being pulled off his feet by his head being hit by a cannon. Doing a very good job. It's all, there's no rig or anything catching him, so he's just basically miming it. And then we took the particular plate, and Connie Fauser, our computer graphics supervisor, our composite supervisor, essentially painted his head out, having to paint in the people behind him, and then add a splat of blood, both from where he gets hit and also hitting on the people next to him. The Battle of Camden was the first big set-piece battle in the film itself. We originally filmed it by actually staging the battle out the window here and covering it with about 40 different cameras. What we found out, though, is that what works for 30 small cameras doesn't work for the large overview, the bird's eye view of the thing, which is what we were doing. So we finally wound up essentially having to get rid of the whole battle that was being seen out the window and replace it entirely with computer graphic soldiers and explosions that we cut from other takes. We used a number of techniques to get this together. We started out with motion capture, where you kind of capture the movement of reenactors who had trained themselves to behave like British soldiers, model a generic soldier on top of it, throw in the texture that you need to make him look like he's actually being costumed. Each of the soldiers had his own individualized clothing going on. The Smithsonian was very good about giving us information on that, just to tell us, exactly what they would wear and how they would be placed. We'd always planned on using computer graphic soldiers for this, although it hadn't really been done before this movie. The real key to believability in this is the choreography and the movement. Even though they're working in a very regimented kind of a situation, it's very important that they each have an individual movement itself. So our people at Centropolis wrote a program that lets you permutate the movements of your reenactor, spread them out over a group of as many as 3,000 individual people. So we have variations, individual variations on each one of the movements. Each height of the soldier is slightly different. We wound up completely recreating this entire battle. 3,000 soldiers, no waiting. Although we shot the Patriot on the historic locations, in this case Charleston, South Carolina, we had to do very, very serious reconstruction, because they're really very much from the 1700s. Very few buildings that would actually work for us, and of course no harbor or sailing ship off to the left-hand side. We draped the foreground street with peat moss, essentially, and filled it up as best we could with extras. But everything off there, 10 feet away from the camera, is no longer in period. So we have to replace it on both ends with ships, buildings, dock furniture, computer graphic people, green screen people, flags, and all the stuff that makes it work. We had to essentially extend both ends of the practical street that's still there now. We could use this middle section where we're on one of the historic houses, but we have to pull away from a miniature on the left-hand side of the street and from the far right-hand side of the street. Miniatures give us a lot more texture and, just generally the most realistic feeling. We had to add whatever we could think of to add life to the buildings. You can see right there essentially how much of it we actually used, and then we start building on the different pieces that we have onto there. Layered them all together, and because we're going around about a 180-degree angle between the two ends of the streets, you can see the before and after. This was really quite an elaborate shot. We're running this on a motion control camera that actually recreates the move that the original camera made so that the people will seem to stay stuck down to the ground and not just drift all over the place. We used a number of different models. These particular ones, the boats are about 30 feet long. This particular building is about 4 feet high. Then a second set of smaller scaled buildings for the far ends of the street, about 2 feet tall roughly. Even for something that would be very, very small at the far end of the street, we were working from the full miniature, and again, it helped hold up the authenticity all the way down through the very deepest parts of the shot. So we're creating a street from the 1700s, from a street out of, actually the year 2000. Battle of Yorktown was the decisive battle of the Revolutionary War. Cornwallis let himself be surrounded on the land side by the Americans and on the water side by the French fleet. So we had to recreate the entire area of the battle itself. We had to recreate the ships, we had to recreate the land on which Cornwallis was, and had to recreate the action of the battle itself, starting from essentially not much. So we started with the original plate. We'd gone off to a field in the middle of North Carolina because there wasn't anywhere close to the ocean that we could be. We dressed it and panned across to where we hoped eventually the British forces would be. First question, of course, is remove all the trees. We lose the trees, we go out to Malibu, we shoot a piece of ocean, and we patch that in. We've added a large matte painting all the way out there. A matte painting essentially where someone paints a picture, making it look photorealistic, and put that into the water area that we had. To get the fleet surrounding the camp, we found a disposition that would be not completely out of keeping with what you could do with a sailing ship at that point, and animated them, animated their cannon fire, animated the entire town of Yorktown, beaten to pieces by shells. It's my favorite shot in the whole show. When you're doing historical features, one of the things is that every war gets seen in the light of the media that covered it. So we see the Second World War as black and white, we see the Korean War as black and white, and the Revolutionary War was covered by painters more than anything else. So our problem in creating a lot of these shots was in finding a balance between realism and sort of the historical, heroic battle painting that went on during the late 18th century. This particular shot is made essentially completely out of models, miniatures, and computer graphic effects. First of all, we used very large miniature ships that we had made in Germany by a company called Magicon. They made these beautiful models. They're about 30 feet long, very, very detailed. We used the shiny mylar down there to get the basic reflection for the boats and move the cameras in toward them to get the illusion of the boat moving forward to us. We took the models, we put them into a synthetic environment that we created with, in this particular case, a nice fluffy clouds. We also made computer graphic water, all the stuff that makes it work. The cannons that fired from the thing were about 8 inches long and actually fired a real charge and a little cork bullet that would take out about half the set if you weren't careful. Off to the left-hand side, you can't see it, we have a board to catch them, which wound up being chopped to pieces. These things actually do fire something that's a little bit dangerous. And shot these, of course, over a green screen to allow us to pull the images off and put them in front of our synthetic sky, water, background plates. Our distance ships were computer graphic, but for the close-up hero stuff, we stayed with miniatures.